Entrepreneurship, it's not for the faint-hearted, that's for sure. That's when we decided we got to take this leap of faith. Now's the opportunity. Little did I know it'd be 1.5 months before the pandemic. You're gonna run into these challenges and ups and downs. There isn't a playbook. You have to accept this idea that failure is just not an option. My 20-year-old self, embrace the power of perseverance. Be okay taking that path that doesn't look very certain, because more often than not, life unfolds in ways you don't expect.
So, Roberto, we're
recording.
We're recording. Yeah, we're recording. Basically, we're good to go. We're in Guadalajara today.
Yeah,
Mexico.
The funny thing was, I don't know why. I remember when I saw you yesterday when you landed. I think we met at TIA a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the first things we said is it'd be cool for you to come down here and film the office and talk to the employees. So it only took a few years, but glad you could finally make it down, man.
Definitely.
It's awesome to have you here. Excited to show you the city, show you the office, and I know this is one of your first times in Mexico, so I think I know you've been jet setting the world lately, so hopefully we live up to the expectations. I
mean, I appreciate you for having us here. The hospitality has been amazing, and I've been traveling a lot around the world, and I've traveled throughout the years to many places, but I've never really been to Mexico. Last month I crossed the border into Juarez.
That doesn't count.
It doesn't count, exactly. I was there for 2 hours. I only went to a restaurant. There was a dust storm. I didn't see anything, but it got me really excited for this trip. And I believe the people here in Mexico are very welcoming. They're very kind. And I've definitely experienced that. And I think the food is just unbelievable. I love Mexican food.
I got some more stuff coming this way. But I'm glad you've liked it so far. It's infectious, the culture. I'll say that. So I'm glad you felt that already in less than a day.
Yeah. And you have a really cool story that we're going to get into today that I'm excited to just kind of, talk about today and discuss various topics, whether it's, your career in logistics, how you got to Guadalajara, the nearshoring scene here in manufacturing, and also logistics talent, and then also the tariffs, stuff like that. I feel like there's a lot of topics that are, kind of being discussed a lot nowadays. And
top of mind, there's buzz.
Exactly. And I'd like to just, take it back to your childhood, because you grew up, you're first generation American, from Nicaragua, your family's from Nicaragua originally, and you grew up in Ann Arbor, Michigan. You ended up attending University of Michigan, and you got to know Andrew Silver there, and became friends, and then you went on to Coyote. But I'd love to just kind of hear from your experience, how was childhood growing up as a first generation Nicaraguan American? How was that like? And can you tell us about your experiences growing up?
Yeah, of course. So like you said, both my parents are from Nicaragua. So they actually immigrated to the US in the 1980s during the Sandinista revolution. I don't think you're probably up on your US history, but that's the Iran-Contra affair. I'll just say this. It was a really ugly time in the country's history. It wasn't safe. My mom was even at risk of getting drafted into the army. So it was that kind of political climate where my grandfather had to get her out of the country. So he was able to get her a visa, and of all places, naturally, Ann Arbor, Michigan is where he sent her. There were some family friends in Ann Arbor, and there's a random sister city connection to Nicaragua. And my dad at the time was a little bit older, so he wasn't in danger of getting drafted into the army, but he had his own architecture firm. And the communist government just took it over. And I think he got to a certain point where he felt the need to get out as well. So he was able to get a job in Detroit, Michigan. And so he got his visa, he moved out there. And they were going to get married back in Nicaragua, but they couldn't return because everything going on, I should say. So they were in Michigan, and I think they realized that the opportunities that the U.S. could give not only them, but their future family was really important. So they did make that ultimate sacrifice. They always had plans to go back once the revolution ended and things cooled down. But I think they saw that, that cliche American dream. I know it's a term that's used a lot, but, for me especially, I have an appreciation for that term because it really did give not only my parents, my siblings, but even our extended family opportunities. So I always had those two worlds at home in front of me. At home, it was more the Latin America, the family gatherings, lively, instilling those cultural values. I'm sure you saw the same thing with, the Chicago-Poland dynamic. But at the same time, I was like any normal kid growing up in the Midwest. I was blessed. I had everything I needed. But I think because my parents weren't from the U.S., we traveled a lot outside of the U.S. while I was growing up. And I think it gave me a real appreciation for the difference of cultures, and it kind of opened my eyes to these different challenges and different cultural nuances. And I think early on it sparked my interest in wanting to learn more about the differences of the cultures. And I think at an early age, I knew like I had this passion of wanting to do something at the intersection of the US and Latin America. It's just something that always intrigued me. I was really proud of it. You know, little did I know staffing and logistics would be that perfect outlet into that. But, you know, the culture, the language, just the passion that people live their lives here in Latin America and Mexico, it's part of my DNA. It's a big part of me. And for me, this is more of a job. Like I said, it's a big part of who I am. So my parents' story, all my professional career and everything, my experiences, it kind of propelled me to want to do business in Latin America. And it kind of almost full circle was that American dream that in many ways led me back here to Latin America, where we're creating jobs here, we're having an impact. So it's really been a dream come true for me.
Yeah. A flip phone, a fax machine, and a pager walk into a bar. The bartender says, "What is this, a museum?" Technology moves fast. What was cutting edge 20 years ago is now more nostalgia than necessity. Sure, a flip phone can still make calls just fine, and a fax machine technically works okay. But why settle for fine when you can have better? If your back office technology still relies on email inboxes and manual workflows, it's time for an upgrade courtesy of ePay Manager powered by OTR Solutions. With ePay Manager, you can modernize your processes, streamline invoice audits, and automate payments with proactive workflows that don't rely on those email inboxes. The result? Faster invoicing, stronger security, and 50% lower back office costs. Don't let your business get stuck in the past like that pager you stopped carrying in 1999. Visit epaymanager.com or text ePayFC to 80483 to bring your back office into the modern age.
And we talked a little bit about this yesterday, that there are some similarities between us, because I'm also first generation Polish American. Like, my parents fled an oppressive government, communism back then, from Poland, in Poland. And then I ended up relocating back to Poland, and I ended up also was in Ukraine for a little bit. And I guess it's just kind of interesting. Like, we both understand like the democracy that we enjoy in America is such a treasure, you know, that like maybe some take for granted because they just don't understand, like, you know, this is not a given, you know, around the world. And so understanding that, like, we could kind of like utilize opportunities and be more grateful for them in the United States. And I think that's really special. So we do have those similarities. We share that. And I think that's really neat. So like, Roberto, going on to like college now, you went to the University of Michigan. That's when you met Andrew Silver?
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about your experiences?
Yeah, so Andrew and I go back. So, you know, we go back to the college fraternity days. We're the same age. So Andrew actually had joined a different fraternity than I did originally. He didn't go through with it and stay in there. I think he had his reasons. So by the time he actually joined the fraternity I was in, I was already finished with the whole like, pledge term thing, and he was just about to start it. And we won't go into too many details about pledging and all that on camera. That's for probably over a beer sometime.
Sure.
Good stories. But I'll say this, when you go through those type of experiences together, you form a very strong bond. And I think our entire age group, it's a very close-knit group of friends. And because of everything we lived, you know, we lived in college for a few years together. So Andrew and I think even one summer in Chicago, like during an internship, we lived together. And it was really interesting to see because a lot of our friends ended up doing a lot of different things, like the typical finance, consulting, all that. Whereas Andrew and I took a very similar path where we got into logistics, worked at Coyote Logistics after college, and then, you know, went on to take on our own entrepreneurial paths. And I think you had asked me the other day, like, did I ever imagine that, you know, we'd be in this position that we are now, where Andrew had the success of Molo, he's a growing podcaster, and we're here in Mexico talking about Rapido and nearshoring. And I probably would have told you yes for Andrew and no, probably not for me. When I was in college, man, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I was thinking about being a sports lawyer or sports agent. I was thinking about law school. Whereas Andrew, since the day I knew him, he was always saying, like, I want to have a company when I'm 30. I mean, he started working at Coyote, I think he was 16, was slinging freight, hustling. So it was no surprise that all happened, but obviously we took adjacent paths in our career, so we've stayed very close, obviously. I'm always picking his brain on stuff. Anytime I have a new idea or I'm thinking of something, he's one of the first calls I make. So he's a great friend. I really admire everything he's accomplished so far in his career, and I know he's got big things ahead. So, but yeah, we go back. So there's a lot of fun stories back then, but it's been really cool to see what he's been able to do.
We share another similarity, Roberto. I actually got my job in logistics through my fraternity brother.
Really?
Yeah, so I went to U of I, and my fraternity brother, Danny Bazelon, his dad owned Trek Freight Services that got acquired by Becker Logistics like 2 years ago. And I remember I was like at the career fair looking for a job, and he was just there with his dad's company, and he was like, Paul, you should go and work for my dad. And that's what I ended up doing. So it's kind of interesting.
Kind of by accident.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious to hear more about your first days at Coyote. Was that like, can you tell us a little bit, like, why did you choose Coyote? And then what was that like when you started? What year was that?
So there's the internship. I'll talk about that first, and
Okay.
then later we can talk about the early years. But kind of like you, I got into freight by accident, I would say. You know, it was that 2008 to 2012 time period when I was going to college, where the Chicago freight scene was just booming. Jeff and Marianne Silver were growing Coyote at an exponential rate. And I was looking for a summer internship. I wanted to get some hands-on experience. And Andrew just kind of suggested, why don't you apply here at my dad's company? And I'd heard about it. Like, he had talked about it a little bit here and there. You know, there was some good marketing going on.
Yeah.
I think it just hit the Inc. 5000 list. So there was a lot of noise going on. But at that time, I really had no idea what they were doing. I knew nothing about transportation or trucking, but I said, you know, what the hell, let's take a chance on it and see. Move to Chicago, it could be fun. And at that time, Coyote was still in the Lake Forest office, or like Lake Forest area. So that's like a suburb of Chicago, slowly taking over Lake Forest downtown, just taking any office space possible. And when I started working there, I got placed under the Heineken account. So I was working under Cameron Ramsdale. I think you talked to him recently. Cam, for me, has been a mentor for me, especially throughout my career at Coyote. I learned a lot. I really enjoyed working with him. But so I got placed as an intern under the Heineken account. And, you know, at that time, that was like a huge deal for Coyote. I think they doubled in size overnight by landing that account. And there's like one moment that I think about in that internship that really stuck with me was, you know, Chris Pickett, who's now with Flock Freight, he was really the one that led the efforts to land that deal. And one day he offered, like, hey, why don't we sit down and I want to talk to you about how we landed this deal. So I remember, like, yesterday, we're in this small little conference room in Lake Forest. It kind of faced the Deer Path Street where the office was. It was late afternoon, I think, and everyone's piling out, trying to get to the metro, get back to Chicago. And him and I ended up staying there, I think, for an hour or two, just talking shop. And he explained to me just how they landed the deal, the entire North American supply chain. And for me, I think it was that moment where I realized, like, we're doing much more than just load orchestration. Like, I'm playing a small part in this big machine that's really disrupting the industry. And it really piqued my interest to really wanted to continue to learn more about the industry and see what else there could be done. It was so ripe for disruption. And I think about things like that, or even when you were talking about Andrew, there was one day after work when we were supposed to hang out, I went to his desk and he just pointed down and said, like, hey, make some calls. And I sat down next to him and we just had some last minute loads. I think they were Coke loads. I forget what they were, but it was almost like that collective mindset that everyone was just rowing in the same direction. Everyone was on a mission to just dominate C.H. Robinson, take as much market share. And it was a rush, especially in that era. Like, it was an adrenaline. It's hard to explain, but I'm sure if you've interviewed other people at Coyote, they would tell you the same thing. There was just something about the culture that I fell in love with. And so much so that I ended up going back the next summer and interning again. And for me, it was just an awesome experience. You know, I worked under Cameron again. We worked under some different customer accounts, and when I was 19 or 20 years old, living in Chicago and Wrigleyville in the summer, like, you know, how can you not have a good time? So I think by the time those two internships were done, I knew that by the time I graduated, I wanted to do this in a full-time capacity and see where I could take my career. So, you know, once I graduated, I knew I wanted to go in formally, and those early years after that were really interesting as well.
Find shippers fast with shipperscrm.com. Shipper CRM is a freight category product, and it is the first U.S. shipper database and freight CRM. Stop wasting time searching for shippers. Shipper CRM is the fastest way to find the shippers you should be working with. This purpose-built sales platform offers 4 key features. U.S. shipper database, access 51,000 research shippers, Magic Map, a revolutionary search engine that helps you quickly find your ideal shippers. Magic Contacts, logistics contacts that automatically update themselves. Relationship Manager plus integrations. Seamlessly manage shipper relationships with built-in CRM tools and integrations. Supercharge your sales process with Shipper CRM. Learn more by going to shippercrm.com.
Oh, sure. And that was 2012 when you
Yeah,
graduated.
so I graduated 2012, and then, maybe a couple months of traveling, backpacking a little bit, getting that out of the way, and then started formally working like as a full-time employee in August of 2012 at Coyote.
So funny you said you went backpacking before you started your job in logistics. I did the same thing. But there's so many similarities.
Similar
between us.
stories here, man.
Yeah. So backpacking, I kind of want to just real quickly, where did you go backpacking?
South America.
Okay.
So there was like two big of our friend groups. Europe is usually the typical path, but again, I'd been to Central and South America, visited a lot of family, but I never really explored South America as much. So like 4 or 5 of us wanted to go to Argentina, Brazil, and just kind of explore. I thought it was like a more authentic experience than just like the typical Europe, which, I mean, Europe is great. I love Europe, but South America, and it was amazing.
So you love the Americas. It seems like you're really tied here. Yeah.
That's what I'm passionate about, man. That's what I love.
Latin America too. Yeah. That's amazing. I love that. And I think there's so much that it offers here. Like, the weather, the culture, the people, everything is great. So 2012, after backpacking through South America, you returned to Chicago. Were they still in the Lake Forest office then or no?
So no, by then they were in the city.
They're in a city.
So yeah.
Okay.
So my first early years at Coyote were all in the city. So I was living downtown with friends and stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what was your role?
So I was technically like a CTM operations coordinator, I think was the title.
CTM.
So collaborative transportation management.
Okay.
So I can tell you a little about the early years if you want. I mean, so like I started working formally out of college, and I didn't really have to go through all the training because I had already done these internships. And at that time, the CTM division, so the collaborative transportation management, was starting to grow quite a bit. And a few of the accounts had like a true North American presence. And that meant they had some Mexico business. And it wasn't maybe like verbatim like this, but this is kind of how to remember. Like we're trying to figure out, like, because our entire class was returning interns. So we're like, are we going to go on the carrier side? Are we going on the customer side? What are we going to do? And I've been doing customer focused stuff in my internships with Cameron. And again, I think they pretty much asked me like, hey, Roberto, are you Mexican, right? I'm like, no, I'm Nicaraguan. But do you speak Spanish? Like, well, yes, I speak Spanish. Perfect. Heineken Mexico. We need someone that can think on their feet and speak Spanish. So kind of just got thrown into that fire. And Heineken at that time had just acquired FEMSA. So FEMSA are all these Mexican beer brands. So it's Tecate, Sol, Dos Equis. You remember the most interesting man in the world commercials. Like, so it was a fast growing business unit, and it was like a very high touch account at the time. So I got thrown into that fire. And in those early days, we didn't have a Mexico department. We didn't really know what we were doing there. Like nowadays, there's great tools like Cargado that can really accelerate that process. But it's interesting because I think it's the dilemma a lot of brokerages face nowadays, where they're working with a domestic customer, things are going well, and then they're saying, hey, like, can you help me out with my cross-border lanes? I think a lot of people scramble. They don't know what to do. They barely know where Mexico is on the map, and they're trying to move loads from Mexico City to Tennessee.
Yeah.
So in those early days, like we had no idea what we were doing. And I think about this one experience. I think we're 2 months into, maybe 2 months into the job, and we're moving, let's call it 50 to 60 Mexican beer loads across Tijuana border every single day and distributing them all over the US. And some of those would go right over the border to San Diego. So those were for me like out of sight, out of mind. I used to love seeing those load tenders. And I'm sitting there one day, back when we had the hard phones with the caller IDs. I'm sure you remember that.
Yeah.
Maybe they still have that. I don't know. But I saw like the San Diego DC calling in, and I'm thinking like, what the hell are these guys? Like, I haven't talked to them since the first day. These loads usually go very smooth. So I pick up the phone, and he starts to tell me when they open up the trailer, 4 people piled out. And I'm just sitting here like, man, like, again, this is like crisis management. Like, turns out what happened was these 4 people somehow got into the trailer on the Mexican side of the border, drank a few 6-packs while it was crossing because it takes a few hours. And then they got out. And then, again, this got escalated. It was a big deal. Heineken was asking, like, what's going on? I'm a few months into the job. I'm trying to deal with this crisis management, but we smoothed it over, and you look back and it's a funny story now, but I think it was that first real introduction because from that day on, that first week till the end of my career, I was involved in Mexico Freight because I really was always involved in some capacity. So it was that first introduction that this type of freight's going to be really different. And I would just continue, like those type of things continue to happen, and I would just take it on the chin, but it was different. It was fun. I just started to really like that there was cultural like nuances to it. And I just got into it and I really enjoyed it. So I did that for the first couple of years. And then eventually I transitioned over to a different account under the same CTM division, the Transportation Management Division. And they had an even larger Mexico presence, more suppliers, more shippers. And there I got really immersed into it where we were doing like LTL optimization, routing guide management, cost optimization. We were even looking at like the cost per 100 pounds of shipments and getting really into it. So for me, I think learning about the industry through that lens, it helped me think about things much more analytically and in a holistic way, and not so much like, the transactional, fast paced. I think a lot of it. So yeah, those were really the early days before I formally moved over and like kind of helped expand the Mexico service offering.
And so Coyote like offered so many more services than like a typical brokerage would. Like it was so much more advanced. Like like what you're just kind of discussing, LTL optimization. That's something that I've never been like, I guess educated on, because the brokerages that I worked at were just typically like mostly over the road, truckload US, freight. So it's quite interesting to hear from you, like, and especially Coyote, having been, I guess, such a massive company that got acquired by UPS and recently by RXO. It's just like, it's interesting to see that like they were able to build that all up, and you were a part of that.
Yeah.
And something that we discussed today during breakfast, we had amazing Mexican breakfast right before this. It was phenomenal. Like Matt Silver, CEO of Cargado, he just announced today they raised the Series A of $12 million.
Yeah.
And you also worked with Matt, Andrew's brother, at Coyote, and he was the one was he in charge of the Mexican freight back then?
So in those early days, like again, I was working on Mexico Freight, but through these accounts. And it kind of just naturally happened when we had these carriers and customers in the US that were asking if we were doing Mexico Freight. So it was a kind of a small growing department. You had a few different people involved. Matt was one of the early like frontier guys there. I remember like yesterday, he would just blast out company-wide emails to the entire company, like sell more Mexico Freight, ask them to have Mexico Freight. I think that's where the name The Forager came from that kind of stuff. But so that was happening all at once. There was a few other people involved, but Matt was definitely one of the key figures there. And for me, I knew like as that department was slowly coming up, I wanted to get involved. And I think it was the right time where when I moved over, my focus was going to be like, let's add some structure. Because at that time, it was just any customer that won Mexico Freight, let's toss it over the fence and see what happens. So it was kind of like organized chaos. And I wanted to go in there, add some structure, set up the operations and manage them so that they were going to be much more scalable. We could have repeated successes. So transitioned over to the department. And it was just like a small group of us, a bunch of bilingual people from different backgrounds, trying to figure out how does Mexico Freight work, how do these different crossings work. And it was fun early on. We learned a lot, and we grew it to a really good size. I think we got it to probably 100 cross-border loads per day, all from Chicago with our existing infrastructure. But doing business in Mexico is different. Here in Mexico, it's just much more relationship-based, and you got to build trust. And what we were constantly hearing from our customers and carriers were, hey, we like working with you guys, but when are we going to meet? When are we going to have a tequila? Like, before I give you more loads, like I want to get to know and break bread with you. And that's just the reality here. You might have saw a little bit today at breakfast, like business here is done over sometimes a 3-hour lunch and a few drinks. Like, that's just the way things are done here sometimes. So I think it was at that same time, Coyote was thinking about international expansion. They had grown so much within the US, a little bit of Canada, where logically, at that time, Mexico was probably top 2-3 trade partner. Now it's the number 1 trade partner to the US. So I think it was just the right time and the right place to decide like, hey, it's time to actually open an office. And so we all got involved in opening that office. And the other key figure that, Matt was very involved, but I was also working very closely with Jose Fernandez. So I don't know if you know Jose.
Mexico?
No, he works at Blue Grace right now.
Blue Grace, okay.
And Jose is a great guy. I learned a lot with him. I really enjoy working with him. So Jose is originally from Mexico, but he had moved to the States to study. I think it was MIT, got like all the MIT guys that Coyote loved to hire back in the day. So he was in Chicago with us managing it. And since he was from Mexico, he was kind of tasked and like, you have to help us select which of the markets we're going to open in.
Today's episode is also brought to you by Control Chain. Struggling to find loads? Control Chain offers a cost-effective solution for carriers to secure more freight contracts with reliable shippers. Plus, you get a free tool that automates tasks like managing order details, updating customers, and sending PODs. Say goodbye to spreadsheets, emails, and phone calls. With Control Chain, you can manage everything on one platform, from planning and execution to getting paid. Sign up at controlchain.com and start receiving loads today.
And we talked about this a little bit earlier, but I think when we were doing that search, we knew it was going to be in one of the big three. Like there's three big markets in Mexico. You got Mexico City, Monterey, and Guadalajara. In my opinion, Guadalajara probably affords you like the highest quality of life. But in my mind at that time, I was like, Guadalajara is probably going to be the last of those three options. And the way I compare it to a lot of people that don't know those cities is like, compared to US cities, like Mexico City is very similar to a New York in many ways. It's large, 20 million plus people. It's fast paced. It's a little chaotic. Whereas Guadalajara is like very similar to Chicago. It's like, for me, Guadalajara is the Chicago of Mexico, where it's still very large. It's still one of the biggest cities in Mexico. It's a little bit more affordable. Quality of life's a little different. So we were kind of going through that process. And I remember the executives came back from Guadalajara. We were doing the scouting trips. And I remember being in a meeting and they fell in love with it. And it's what you've probably seen in the little time you've been here. It's vibrant, it's cosmopolitan. Mm-hmm. And looking back on it, like we ended up selecting Guadalajara, obviously. And I look back on that decision and I do think maybe it wasn't the best decision strategically at the time. I thought maybe we should have first opened in Monterey or Mexico City. And I say that because the largest concentration of carriers and customers are in like Monterey, closer to the border. Monterey's a few hours from Laredo, for example. I mean, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but even like my first year down living here, I was spending close to 2 or 3 weeks a month going to customer carrier visits, industry events. A lot of people don't know, but Guadalajara is a few hours away from the Puerto de Manzanillo. It's like a big port, a couple of hours from here. So everything we consume here is actually usually from that port. So there's not as much inbound, outbound, cross-border freight. So again, it was interesting. I think he'd like never admitted. I would jokingly tell, like, I think Jose was like, if I'm going to move my family back, why not Guadalajara, Mm-hmm. But it was a great choice because it is a growing, I mean, it's a technology hub. It's the Silicon Valley in Mexico. And it's also a growing logistics hub now. And I think you've seen that. And for me, it was probably one of the proudest moments of my career at Coyote, being involved in opening that office, helping set the culture. And I think in many ways, the success we did have with the Guadalajara Coyote office, a lot of companies kind of follow suit. I mean, you're looking at Rapido. The reason we're here is because of the success we had. I was living here. But then you've seen recently in the last couple of years, a couple other logistics companies also open their doors here. And I think there's that certain level of validation and comfort that companies have because Coyote did it a couple of years ago that I can do it too. So it's been really interesting to see how it's kind of grown into this growing logistics hub. And yeah, so that for me is kind of the full circle. But again, when we opened the office, I was still living in Chicago. So I was going back and forth. The year before I moved down here, I think I spent 40 nights here. So I was down here constantly. And I think there was a certain moment in time where as we were slowly growing the office, I was spending a lot of time here, where things just kind of aligned. We had to make some changes to the sales org. And I think, like I said, there was things in my personal life that lined up. There was a need for the company. And it was deep down something I always wanted to do. I knew I wanted to, at some point, kind of what you've been experiencing, moving back to the motherland or closer to the motherland. And and experiencing that. So I remember the executive sponsor at that time was Scott Shara, and he asked me to move down here, and it happened really quick. It was from like 1 month to the next. Put all my stuff in public storage, got rid of my lease in Chicago, and I moved down here in December 2018 as an expat, 1 year assignment. And the goal was like, let's reorg the sales structure. Let's find a true sales leader that is from Mexico, that has a lot of experience, open an office in Monterey, expand our sales efforts, and also just let's keep working on the strategic projects that I'm working on. So moved down here, and my plan was to be down here for a year or two, maybe. I was thinking about opening a tequila brand on the side. I was thinking about that. So when I moved down here, I was networking and all that. But as always, I think life has different plans for you. And here we are in 2015, 6-7 years later, and we're talking about Rapido and nearshoring.
2025.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Okay, good.
I'm thinking about it. We're in 2025, 6-7 years later.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's kind of crazy the turns that life gives you sometimes, but yeah, I think I'm better off. Nearshore staffing for logistics is more fun up my alley anyways. But yeah, that's kind of the long-winded. I know I went on some tangents there, but
That was great.
that's kind
I
of
love that
just
story.
what happened and how we started, expanding into Mexico and how I transitioned over.
Sure. I mean, I love that story. I love listening to all of it. I think it's fascinating for even our viewers to kind of understand like the Coyote expansion and, what made you actually come here. And so you had a 1-year assignment in 2018. How big was Coyote Guadalajara office? Like those 2 years after that?
Yeah,
opened,
2
right?
years. We were growing it pretty quick. I think our first class was 15, and then we were doing a couple waves of 15. I'd say we were probably between 60 and 80 people when I moved down here. And then by the time I left, we were 120 people down.
Wow, so you've almost doubled over that 1 year. And so how was it like moving here to Guadalajara? You were spending a lot of time here already, but like, how did it feel like?
The shock, yeah.
Yeah.
So there wasn't like a culture shock or any surprises because, like you just said, I had been doing a lot of business in Mexico already, and with my upbringing, I was already very familiar with the Latin American culture. Like the reality is, Paul, when you're doing stuff in Latin America, you just need to accept certain processes are going to take a longer time. Like it's just not as efficient. Like the running joke here, like you're going to probably see it here soon. Like in every corner, there's an OXXO. An OXXO is like a convenience store. It's like a CVS.
Yeah.
So you go into an OXXO to buy something really quick after work, and sometimes there's a really long line. And there's 3 people working, but there's only 1 person at the register, and 2 people are sitting next to them laughing and watching TikTok. It's like, what are we doing here? But like everyone kind of just jokes. It's just like, it is what it is. So again, I don't think there was like that culture shock per se, but I think for me, the most valuable learning lessons I would say was, how do you manage like a US multinational company in this nearshore Mexico, LATAM environment? And how do you navigate those cultural differences and understand that, there is some differences. You got to be empathetic to the local culture, but at the same time, there's a lot of expectations from the C-level, and there's a lot of executive pressure. So for me, there were what I call like expensive learning lessons. And what I mean, like I'll think about it in 2 ways. There was like the overarching business strategy, and then there's the talent strategy. Both, I think you would agree, are very important to a successful brokerage, whether it's in US or Mexico. So when we first moved down here and opened the office, the plan was, like just mentioned, like this is Chicago, Mexico. We're going to take that same playbook. So what does that mean? We are going to hire a bunch of young, hungry talent. We're going to create an awesome culture. We're going to pay them well. And we're going to tackle that intra-Mexico market aggressively to complement that cross-border base that we had already built. And what we learned early on, Paul, was that intra-Mexico market is way different than the intra-US market. It's just not as standardized. It's not as efficient, I would say. This idea of being a shipper of choice, like accessorials, 2-hour unloading times, like that just wasn't very common here. Like, unfortunately, sometimes Mexican shippers can burn through different carrier relationships. They don't treat carriers probably the way they should at many times. So for us early on, we were just, we're pushing and pushing because that was the strategy. That's what we wanted to do. And we were burning through money. We're burning and churning through customers, carriers. We're burning through our employees. I mean, Paul, even one time I was asked, like, what's the line item for in the TMS where I can put bribing to get offloaded? And I was just like, why did you just ask me that question? We're not going to bribe someone to get a trailer offloaded. But I think it was just that, like that early lesson that this is different. And we kept pushing and pushing. And I think we realized over time, like, as we took a step back, we realized like the most profitable, scalable, lower cost to serve business was the cross-border freight, especially the stuff that was coming from our US sales funnel. So I think for us, we made that quick strategy change to like, we're no longer doing intra-Mexico and we're going to focus on cross-border freight from the US shippers and the Mexico shippers. But that took us a while to kind of make that decision. So like there was that from the business strategy. And then from the talent strategy standpoint, when we first got down here, we were just enamored with the talent. Like we were hiring from the best universities in Mexico, like the Ivy Leagues of Mexico. And I think what we realized was we could get access to a lot of really good talent because of the job market and the conditions of the market. And what we really needed early on, Paul, like when we're building this foundation here, this office, is we wanted to build that like no excuses mentality that was so successful in the US. And we just needed people that were hungry, that would hit the phones, that would hustle, that would help us just kind of establish that high performance culture. And I think what we saw was a mix. We saw a lot of people that bought into that and they were amazing employees. Many of those people are now doing amazing things here in Mexico in the industry. Even some of them have opened their own logistics companies. It's been cool to see that. And I think there was also a mix of people that didn't buy into that almost had this mindset that maybe they were overqualified or too good for this work, because these were entry-level logistics jobs. Let's just call them what they were. Yeah. And I think it took us a few years to refine that hiring strategy. But again, for me, those are two examples of what I call like just expensive learning lessons, where it was almost like having an international MBA on the job, where like, for lack of better terms, I really learned that we had to like tropicalize your business strategy. You got to take best practices from what works well in the US, but you also have to adopt them to the local culture and understand there's certain ways that things are done here. But at the same time, it's really common for the local teams to say like, well, that's just how it's done here. And you got to challenge that status quo as well and challenge that norm. So it's a really interesting balance that you have to strike and make sure that you're delivering those high results, but you are understanding like what are those intrinsic motivating factors for people here. And I think that's just really important. So, and I can tell you a funny story. When you're thinking about like that culture shock, like even the name Coyote itself. So when we first moved down here, like you think of the name Coyote, the brand's really well known in the US, Europe now, Canada. But what people don't even realize is that Coyote in Spanish, or Coyote, has a completely different connotation. A coyote here is someone that smuggles people across the border. So when I first moved down here, I was taking all the inbound marketing leads from the website. And I remember reading one of the messages and it said like, hey, we're a family of 4. We want to cross through Nogales. And in my mind, I'm probably thinking like they must have Googled like Coyote crossing or something like that and found the Coyote Logistics website and must have been thinking like, this is so modern now. It's so sophisticated. It's like you can pay more for a reefer. It's like refrigerated. Like, this is great. Back. Yeah, BC. Like it's hot at the border. Like this is an AC option. And just little things like that where even, obviously I told him I wasn't a marketing lead, but things like that happen. I could tell you the amount of stories where I was meeting people for the first time in Mexico saying, hey, I'm Roberto, I'm with Coyote. And they would just like the looks I get that are like imprinted in my mind, like the double takes. And they'd be like, your name is what? Coyote Logistics? Like, what do you guys do? And we'd have to overcome those objections. Like, no, we're a legit US company. UPS just acquired us. Like, but it was a very common question. Like, why is that your name? And I tell that because I think it just underlines how critical cultural awareness is. Even things like communication, here in Latin America is just sometimes indirect. It's more relationship based. In the US, maybe it's a little bit more direct, concise, a little colder, but neither is better or worse, I would say. But I think those are important things that I think are just extremely important to understand and just make sure you understand that. So yeah, that's again, back to your original question. No culture shock. I kind of learned to live that like international MBA on the go. Like there'd be times where I'd be in a meeting in Mexico City with a big client, and then 2 days later, I'm in the Chicago headquarters presenting to leadership. So like, I really had to learn to be able to go in and out of these different modes, different languages, because the approach is different. So there's a little bit of to have that effectiveness, you had to have a very different approach. So it was just invaluable learning lessons, and a lot of those lessons have kind of shaped the way I even approach things here with Rapido. And like those are things that aren't in a textbook, or like you have to learn on the job, you have to live them through. So it was great early on, that experience living here for the first time, like that full circle, living the dream here, and just it was just so invaluable, those like international business lessons you learned.
Yeah, for sure. I'm curious, Roberto, like if like right now, like a carrier is listening in, or like a broker from the US that wants to do business here in Mexico, like what are like some kind of tips or advice that you'd give them in terms of like cultivating a better relationship with someone down here? Like just like some simple
Like
points.
a US?
Someone from the US wants to build relationships with either a shipper in Mexico or a carrier in Mexico, or someone here. Like what are like some like, I don't know, simple
I'd
pointers?
say the first thing I tell everyone, because I get this question a lot, is you need to get down to Laredo. And I think it's really important to go to Laredo, meet with the people, truly understand what happened, because the border is like, well, the famous, or infamous, I should say, black hole in a cross-border shipment. When shipments get to the border, it seems like everyone loses visibility. No one understands what happens with the Mexican custom broker, the U.S. custom broker. There's another party that actually crosses the trailer. So we're talking about 5 to 7 parties involved in every Mexican cross-border load. So I would say get down to Laredo and understand that process, because I think a lot of times, especially early on, we were trying to do this without ever visiting or understanding the process. And it can really frustrate different carriers or customers that you're working with. If at the end of the day, they're hiring you to solve problems. They want you to be a problem solver. They want to make it as smooth as possible. If they're moving a load from Mexico to the US, they want to work with a provider that understands the process. And you're not going to understand the process till you go down and actually meet with people at the border. So I'd say that's one. And then the other is taking that time. We talked about it a little earlier, is just to develop those deep relationships. People in Mexico really want to understand who they're working with. They want to build that trust. So I think visiting, if you're like have any customers or carriers here in Mexico, like having those visits, coming down in person, I think is extremely important. But again, I think it's really key to make sure if you're going to have someone from the US try to tackle this kind of freight, you should have a subject matter expert that understands it. It's fine if you don't speak Spanish, you're not from Mexico, that's fine. We had a lot of people like a Matt Silver, like an Alex Jennings guy, like those guys didn't have any roots from Mexico, but they took the time to learn the ins and outs of it. What was important, the culture here, what do the carriers want to hear, what do the customers want? So for me, it's building those relationships, truly understand what the process is like, and then get down to the border or Mexico and see it for yourself, touch it and feel it, because it is so different than like just a standard one pick, one drop, Chicago to Dallas, where I would just advise anyone that's thinking about it, like get down here and feel it.
Yeah. Nearshoring of manufacturing, that's been like, it's been a big deal, especially ever since the pandemic. I'm curious, because you came here in 2018, like, and then you saw the pandemic happen, and then you saw like post-pandemic, like the investments being made here in manufacturing. Can you tell us a little bit about that, Roberto? Like, how does that look like? Who's coming here? Who's actually opening up factories here? How is that looking like? Because I know a lot of goods are being shipped to the US. So a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's a great question. So the US is obviously the biggest country investing in here. Like in terms of foreign direct investment, it's like US, China, and then I think last time I saw there's some European countries mixed in there as well. So here, especially in Guadalajara specifically, you're looking at high tech, pharmaceutical, all different things. But you nailed it, man. It's been a nearshoring boom. I have a friend that works like in the incentive parts of the government, and they told me the stat. I think it was in 23 or 24. There was over 70 U.S. companies alone that had opened some type of manufacturing presence in the U.S. or in Mexico.
Last year, you said? Sorry.
I think it was in 23 or 24.
Okay.
So it's been a
been
nearshoring boom, and I think it's a convergence of a lot of factors. You could say it's almost a perfect storm of a couple of factors. I think one, it's the obvious geographic advantage. So we border the U.S. obviously here, but I think because of the pandemic and things like that, you see more companies wanting to shorten their supply chains. How can I de-risk my supply chains? And I think because of that, all that foreign direct investment you're seeing, like just that alone, I think probably adds close to 1% to GDP annually just with foreign direct investment. So there's that. There's what I call the geopolitical tensions, or let's call it the economic momentum, where even before the more recent conversations that have been happening, there's more and more companies that are looking to produce closer to home. And you're seeing that, especially even now with the ongoing tariff conversations. I think it's going to continue to grow. So there's that. Then there's also the demographics. I think it's a very skilled, educated labor pool here in Mexico. The median age is 29. So you have like this burgeoning, fast-growing class of working people across technical, engineering, like very quality talent, a lot of international degrees. So for nearshoring, for like supply chain logistics companies, manufacturing companies, there's just a lot of great talent there. So there's that, and then there's the infrastructure. When you think about the infrastructure, again, it's not perfect, but when you compare it relative to some other nearshore environments or countries, I should say, it's about as good as it gets. And there's a lot of investments to improve rail, highways, capacity, internet connectivity, et cetera. So I think those have been the main factors. And I mean, one of the common questions I'm getting right now, it's obvious, like what's going on with the tariffs? What's the feeling here? And we're not going to get into opinions or politics or anything like that, but I think we can talk in facts where, I mean, when you think about U.S. trade, it accounts for 73% of GDP here in Mexico.
Wow.
Like the old saying is, when the U.S. has a cold, Mexico has a fever. The countries are that interconnected. So if these things continue to escalate, these recent conversations, like right now the feeling is there is a little bit of tension. There's a lot of uncertainty here of what's going to happen. The reality is if these tensions continue to escalate, like we're talking about a multi-year economic headwind that could have a significant impact on Mexico. Now, I think eventually through the upcoming negotiations, it'll all work out. And regardless of what happens, you're going to continue to see a boom. But I think there's another level that could be unlocked of nearshoring that would be at unprecedented heights. But that window isn't going to be open forever. And I think Mexico does really need to emphasize production as like a fundamental thing for like overall growth. I think they need to think about reforming the economic sector a little bit and continue to make sure there's enough talent and skilled people to support this nearshoring boom. I think you need to depoliticize the judiciary. That's really started to recently scare away some foreign investment. Like you need to have that healthy checks and balance like any democratic country. I think they just need to focus on like the economic agenda for development. That has to be a continued focus. Like I said, like this window isn't going to be open forever. Like Mexico needs to capitalize. And for U.S. companies that are thinking about it and want to capitalize on this nearshore boom, I would just say, and we talked about it a little bit, like you really need to find a trusted partner. Like you really need to work with someone that understands how to navigate these waters. It's just extremely important to do it with someone you trust. Like I've talked to people in the U.S. and other countries that have opened here, and it's hard. It's really hard to do on your own. And for all the great things and amazing qualities this country offers, there's also some complexities. There's some security challenges. There can be political instability, corruption, like different regulations and labor laws. But if you know how to navigate and overcome those hurdles, it's really amazing what Mexico can offer your country. And if you understand, especially like, what do the people want here? Like what's important for people here? What's important for people in Mexico? It's family, it's their relationships, it's religion, it's staying true to their values. So if you can understand that and understand how to handle some of the more business, bureaucratic things, the impact it can have on your company can permeate throughout your organization, your culture. It's just such an energetic culture. It's a brilliant workforce. They are loyal. If they're treated right, they're so loyal, hardworking, where I really do think the impact that it can have on your company is going to be shown in much more than just like a balance sheet or a P&L. So again, I think it's a really unique time for both Mexico and companies in the U.S. that want to take advantage of it. It's really important to have trusted partners. And for Mexico, I mean, now or never, like you really got to take advantage and capitalize on this opportunity because the window's not always going to be open.
Yeah. I'm curious, Roberto, where do you see like the next 5 to 10 years of like Mexico's, I guess, presence in nearshoring and like relationship with the US headed? Like, what's your view on that? Like, where are we going?
I think we're going to continue to see the boom. I do think, again, we don't need to go into the politics or anything, but I would say of all the countries, I've seen Mexico and the U.S. be able to have the most common ground on a lot of these topics. And I think a lot of it will be around how much dependency with China is Mexico willing to have. And I think the U.S. will work that out. But I think people forget the USMCA trade agreement's coming up. Like those renegotiations are coming up. So I am very confident that the U.S., Mexico, and Canada will find a resolution that everyone can get their political victories to tell people. And I expect it to continue to grow. I really think we're going to see even more and more nearshoring, more production closer to home. So I'm expecting this to continue to grow and not stop anytime soon.
Yeah. It's definitely been cool for you to see that, especially like from the pandemic causing the boom, because like there was just all the delays because of the shipping into like the ports, like the Western ports from China and et cetera. Everyone started like thinking about, nearshoring closer, and Mexico is taking advantage of that, which is great. And it's definitely going to be continually growing. There's just like a hiccup here, I guess, maybe with the political kind of tensions, but
like any country, there's things like that, but
long-term thinking wise, like this is still like there's so much opportunity here for nearshoring. So much valuable information, Roberto. Like this has been amazing, the stories that you've been saying, and I would love to now get into like Rapido or Rapido. This
there you go, Rapido. Gotta learn to roll the R.
Yeah, Rapido. And so like you were here for a year, you had a year-long project with Coyote, and that was, I think, December 2018 to December 2019, right? And then like, if I'm not mistaken, February 2020 is when Rapido launched, and it was at the WeWork that we were actually by today. So tell us about like the origin behind that. I know I've discussed it with Danny, so I know it, but for anyone that doesn't know, like, what's the story behind Rapido, and like what made you decide after so many years at Coyote that this was the time for you to, be an entrepreneur and, go on your own?
Yeah. So you've heard the side from Danny, obviously, and this original idea of Rapido was Danny's original vision. And Danny and I actually didn't really know each other before we started Rapido.
You just worked at Coyote.
Yeah, we both knew each other at Coyote. So the actual real connection that kind of reconnected us later was through his wife. So I was pretty close with his wife from the Chicago days. We were good friends. And Danny got on this idea of nearshore staffing because of some challenges he was having at, his at Blue Grace when he was at his company. I know he's told you that story. So Tatiana, his wife, connected us, and we talked on the phone for the first time in I don't know how long. And he just started peppering me with questions on what's Mexico like, what's the talent like, what's it like doing business. And we just started talking more and more about the idea. And it got to the point where like, you need to come down and see it. Like, just the same advice I gave you. And I think he was already planning on coming down anyway. So he took a red eye one weekend, and I hosted him. We're just going to do a quick lunch. It was going to be a 2-hour lunch, I think. And I think we ended up staying there for, I don't know how long, the whole night. And we bounced around, but a couple bottles of wine. And I think we were like writing ideas and napkins and things like that. And as we were talking more, obviously it really resonated with me. I've been living this for 10 plus years now almost, of just understanding the true potential that Mexico has, especially for U.S. companies. And as we started talking more and more, I think we just really were aligned on what that Northstar would need to be, especially from a culture standpoint. I think it really helped that we both had come from that Coyote background, that Marianne Silver school of culture, if you will. A lot of what we do now is really inspired from what we learned from our Coyote days and the way that we run this company and the culture that we try to ingrain here. So again, he was going to do it no matter what. He was set on the idea. And for me to see that, it was cool. So I think I always had that itch to be an entrepreneur. I always, love the idea of just kind of being your own boss, paving your own way. But it was a little different my situation than Danny, because I was already living down here, like you said, as an expat. I was being sponsored. My apartment was being subsidized. Like there's a lot of things that I had to figure out in the background to be able to stay down here and legally be able to work here and eventually be on the path to be a permanent resident, etc. So Danny was actually the one that took that original leap of faith. He left his job a few months earlier. So I was kind of working in the background for a little bit. And again, we got the LLC and everything set up in 2019, but like the Mexican entity was set up in February 2020, like 2 days before. We barely made the first payroll, but yeah, so we set it up, and again, so it was February 2020, and for me, it was a tough decision because I was so proud of what we had built. We just talked about the Guadalajara office. When I say that we had an amazing culture, like I've never seen a closer group of people. And I've been to different offices, seen different companies, and it was really special to see that. So it was a challenge. I also wanted to make sure if I'm going to leave, I want to leave everything in really good order. So I gave a notice of a lot of window, but I was also really excited about this vision that we had. And I think together we realized that we could have a really unique angle where we have a deep understanding of the U.S. logistics industry, what are our customers' pain points and needs, but we also have a really good understanding of the Mexico market, the talent pool, the regulations. So that's when we decided we got to take this leap of faith. Now's the opportunity. I mean, little did I know it'd be 1.5 months before the pandemic, but that's kind of the origin story. Kind of all started over the lunch. Danny was going to do it no matter what, but I think we realized together, and then we have a third partner as well that's helped, but he's not in the day-to-day, but yeah, that's kind of where it all started. And obviously that lunch led to a lot of conversations, and we just continued to align on a lot of things, and he's been a great partner since.
Yeah, and we've done a couple interviews with Danny. So if anyone's interested in learning more about the whole origin story, definitely worth checking out. We'll put some links here so you could click on it. But yeah, I mean, you started right before the pandemic, and that must have been pretty wild to experience. I mean, I can't imagine, like, you start a business, you take this big leap of faith, and all of a sudden everything just shuts down.
Yeah.
And like, I'm curious, like, what was that like for you, like psychologically? Like, I'm sure you were tested a lot greatly during that time.
Those early days, again, I think it was, let's say we started in February. I think mid-March is when the world shut down.
Yeah.
So we're a month and a half into this. I think we have maybe 3 clients, 15 people, so still very small. And we kind of hit this rut for a few months because the whole world didn't know what was going to happen. So obviously these logistics companies in the US weren't willing to make any big decisions right now, especially on a new company that doesn't even have a brand yet or a reputation. So I'd be lying to you. I mean, I can't speak for Danny, but for me, there were a lot of sleepless weeks and nights early on where, like, did we just leave a comfortable situation to do this? And then this pandemic hits. But we just kind of kept putting our head down, persevered. I think a few months in, we finally landed that one client that really got us over that hump, that invigorated us. And then obviously the market exploded that summer and we rode that wave hard. But those early months, or I would say even that first year, I learned more in that time than probably my whole career.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think entrepreneurship, it's not for the faint-hearted, that's for sure. But there are some times where you have to accept this idea that failure is just not an option. And you're going to run into these challenges and ups and downs and situations where there isn't a playbook. There isn't like a clear answer. You don't know how to handle the situation, especially him and I are first-time entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And we just kind of always had that mindset, like we're going to figure it out no matter what. It's pretty amazing, like what you can accomplish when your back's against the wall and you see what you're really capable of, especially when like if you don't figure it out, like there is that risk that, hey, we might not make it. So those early months, we got through that run and we just started to grow. And again, I think we just always had that mindset. We're going to do whatever it takes. And for us, that meant, for example, interviewing and getting on the job board. Like Danny and I interviewed the first 120 employees that we hired as clients. Like we wanted to make sure, like we knew exactly what our clients wanted.
Mm-hmm.
We wanted that first batch of people to be like almost handpicked by us, processing payroll, I mean, we're moving like IT equipment across the city when we're moving offices in like garbage bags and like luggage. There's times where like a labor union was trying to extort us. Like we're trying to negotiate office space because we're growing so fast. So there was just so many things, like so many stories like that early on, but it was just a rush. It was exhilarating. We loved it. And yeah, there was definitely some of those moments, especially in that like in between when the pandemic first hit, where there was like, I wouldn't say worries, but that question came in the air.
Yeah.
But then after that summer hit, we knew like we had something here and that we were just gonna ride that wave, and here we are now. So it was a great experience early on, and we learned quite a bit.
Yeah, definitely. And now fast forward, it's what, today is April 7th, 2025. And like you have a massive team. Like you said there's 3 floors here. You have another office that you opened last year in Leon.
Yeah, Leon.
Leon. Yeah.
So yeah, fast forward today, we're close to 700 people now. So
Incredible.
between Guadalajara, which you're obviously going to see today, and then Leon, like you said, we opened that office last April, so a year ago. And we're excited about Leon. We are very pumped about the talent. It's been a great option for us, and we're going to keep investing more. We're actually going to be sneak preview here, but we're going to be opening a new office in a couple months. So I think it's going to be one of the best offices in Leon. I think we're going to be able to attract great talent there. So that's where we are today. Obviously, still solely focused on everything in this logistics ecosystem, offering roles across sales, operations, back office, but also starting to get more into some technical roles. I think a lot of companies are interested in that. And I think we were talking about earlier, I think a lot of our focus has been on brokerage, asset-based, some freight tech companies that need help. But there's so many like adjacent things that we haven't got into yet that we're excited to explore that's still under that logistics ecosystem, whether it's final mile, air, ocean. Like there's a lot of things that we've done a little bit of that, but we think there's a lot of opportunities. So that's where we're at today, though. It's been a hell of a ride since being in a 4-person WeWork office.
That's one of the things that like I love about logistics. It's such a massive industry, and there's so many different moving pieces, different facets of it. And like we're strictly like focused on freight brokerage, content wise, most of the time, over the road, U.S. domestic freight. But like even for Freight Caviar, we want to expand that and the content that we create, because I find it so interesting overall, and it's cool that you're also looking at that. I'm kind of curious, like 5 years ago, if you were to like tell yourself 5 years ago that you're going to be in this position now, would you have believed yourself?
We had pretty high goals. We definitely had set a very high bar for where we wanted to be. But I think we got to where, like our 5-year goal originally, we got to there, I think, in 3 years. And no question, the market, there's some luck, there's good timing, but there's a lot of hard work and right timing behind that as well. But yeah, if I'm being honest, I don't think we would have I didn't think we were going to get to this point this early, but it's been exciting. And now we've set even higher goals for the future, and then we're excited for what's coming.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
I'm also curious, like this is, I guess, kind of just a bonus. Like what's like some advice you would give to like your 20-year-old self if you could like go back in time?
To my 20-year-old self,
like you're a college student.
The big thing I'd say, and I just talked about it a little bit, is like embrace the power of perseverance. Like embrace the idea of learning or failing fast, failing early, failing often. I think a lot of times there isn't that certain path, and that's great. Like that's when you learn the most, when you go through those obstacles and challenges, when you learn to grow, innovate, and learn more. So I'd say that, and just continue to be curious and be a lifelong learner. I think at that age, I probably wasn't as into as I would have liked into like podcasts and reading. And nowadays, that's part of my like daily routine. It's so important for me, and just staying in shape and like being right mentally and physically is so important to being your best version of yourself for not only the company, but your family, your wife, whatever it might be. So I think along the way, it's just really just trusting yourself, betting on yourself, be okay taking that path that doesn't look very certain, because more often than not, life unfolds in ways you don't expect. I'm a living testament. We're here in Mexico talking about nearshoring, and I never thought I'd be here with you. I
never thought I'd be
20 years, like that's 13 years ago for me. So like, it's been crazy to see that, but like that wouldn't have happened if you don't take some of those unexpected directions and take some of those risks. So that's what I would tell myself.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I love that. I mean, I'm the same way. Like, I quit my brokerage job. It was a cushiony job. I had, apartment paid for, good salary, and I left it. And I didn't like, I opened a brokerage for a while, but I didn't like it. I didn't like doing the brokerage, but I started making memes. And then all of a sudden I'm here doing this interview with you in Guadalajara, Mexico. And it's just been such a journey, just because I took that risk of leaving and like kind of figuring out my own path, in the industry. And because this industry is so big, there's so many different opportunities, if you want to take, like, if you're willing to take a risk, like, the chances of you succeeding, as long as you persevere, are honestly pretty high, because most people are afraid to take that risk.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say this quickly, like, to add to that, like, I think a lot of times for entrepreneurs, like, the difference between having success and not having success early on is all around perseverance and like putting your head down and just figuring it out. Like, you can always find a way to figure it out or find someone in your network. So I agree with what you're saying there.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's already 12:15 Monday. We have an incredible day in Guadalajara planned that we're going to be filming. So there's going to be a lot of great content coming. I'm kind of curious, actually, Roberto, tell us a little bit what we have, like, what's the rest of our day looking like today?
So today, what's the day look like? I think, you haven't seen the office yet. We came right into here to interview. So we're going to give you like the whole tour of the Rapido HQ down here in Mexico. I want you to meet some of the team. I think really they're the most important part of this business. Like I always say, that's my why. That's what gets me excited. It's the opportunities we've been able to give people here. We touch 700 families now. So like for me, that's my purpose and what I'm most excited about, most proud of here. So I think it's only fitting that you got to sit with that team and hear from them. And I think it'll be cool for you to hear the perspectives of what they've seen working for the U.S. industry from Mexico. And so you'll be meeting with a team. I think we're going to try to go visit one of these cross-border carriers that we used to work with quite a bit that handles a lot of different type of kind of high-touch, white glove type service loads. And then I think we're going to go explore kind of like what used to be like the older part of town. It's like one of the hottest neighborhoods in the world per CNN. I don't agree with it, just to be clear, but it is a cool neighborhood. It's gentrified. It's growing. So we're going to probably do that, have some dinner, do some mariachis, like get you some of the culture so you can see it. So that's the plan. And then tomorrow you'll probably see downtown and some different, more like authentic parts of the city that are a little bit more like, artisans, hardworking people. So you got to see both sides, like the cosmopolitan and also like the heart, what's beautiful here. Like, we're at the epicenter of this nearshoring boom here, but there's just an amazing group of people here in Mexico that I want you to see that and feel it and get to know them.
I'm so excited. I think it's already been incredible. Been here for less than 24 hours, and we have another couple of days left. So thank you so much, Roberto, for doing this interview. This was a great interview. I loved it. So many amazing stories from you and learning like about your experience like through Coyote and then starting Rapido here with Danny. Amazing. I really appreciate you guys. Rapido was one of the earliest Freight Caviar sponsors too. So shout out to you guys for promoting us or sponsoring us and helping us out from the early days. And just so excited for everyone who's here now see the documentary that we're putting together to actually take a look at what's happening in Guadalajara from the nearshoring of manufacturing, nearshoring of U.S. logistics talent, and so much more. So this is awesome. Thank you, Roberto.
Thank you, man. Excited for you to see everything.
Yeah, definitely.